Did you know that in addition to the standard knit you typically get with your circular knitting machine, you can manipulate the yarn to achieve different looks, like the ribbing I've done right here? And that is what I'm going to show you how to do today. Now, when it comes to adding your ribbing to your project, you can do this at the beginning of your project or the end of your project. You can also do it in the middle of your project. It really just depends on what you plan on using it for. For this leg warmer, I actually wanted ribbing at the beginning and the end of the project. So I'm going to show you those two methods. For this project, we are going to cast on with waste yarn. And if you have any questions about how to use waste yarn or any other techniques used in this video that I don't go into detail with, check out my knitting machine playlists for more information. So we're just going to start by casting on in our standard method using waste yarn. After you've added your waste yarn, it's time to add your working yarn. Now we, as I mentioned, are going to be adding the ribbing here to the beginning of the project. Because of that, we have our waste yarn here, and that's going to allow us to identify those loops because we are going to need to release stitches and re-stitch them together to create the ribbing. And this again is the example. This is what we are going for. For this particular project, I'm actually going to knit 10 standard rows, and then we will release them and create the ribbing. So we're going to cast on with our working yarn and then just knit 10 rows. So I've gone around 10 rows and I'm ready to create the ribbing. I am using a 32 pin machine, and the ribbing design that I'm going to use is just every other pin because it's an even number. It's very easy to create this pattern. Depending on the size of machine or the number of pins that you're going to be using, that will really determine what your pattern is going to look like. So now to create our pattern, as I mentioned, we are going to go every other pin. We're going to release the stitches and then we're going to stitch them back together using our crochet hook. So we're going to start with our first pin, and that will make it very easy to identify here at the beginning of our project. So the first thing you need to do is you're going to use a loom pick or your curved darning needle, something of the sort, because we are going to release this first stitch from our pin. Now, once you release it, it is a live stitch, which means if you do not catch it and you let it go all the way down your project right here, it's just going to come all the way unraveled. So you do want to hold on to the last loop of your project just to make sure it doesn't come unraveled. Then we're going to release all of these stitches all the way down. Again, be very careful. And here's our last loop. So once you have your last loop, you're going to take your crochet hook and you're going to place it under the loop. And then you're going to go to the next bar that's right here and you're going to pull it through. You're going to do the same thing now that we've picked up that loop. And the first one's going to be a little bit harder because you have the yarn tail to contend with. Just keep that in mind. So now we're going to go to the next, pick up the loop and pull it through. The loop, pull it through. Right, so we just picked up all of those posts and now we're going to pull right back onto that first loop. Once you do that, make sure you push it all down. That's going to prevent any of those tucked or dropped stitches. So we're going to push that down right there. So now we need to continue. We just did this first pin, so we're going to skip the second pin, but we're going to make sure that that falls down. Also, just to point out, your yarn, your working yarn is still in your yarn guide. We are still knitting as we go around. If you accidentally take your working yarn out, all of your stitches will drop. So do make sure that it does stay in your yarn guide. So now we're going to come over to this stitch right here. And one little tip, it's a little easier to get off and on if it is a little bit lower here as opposed to right here in the center. And you're going to continue that all the way around your project. So now we've gone all the way around. We're back to that first pin. And you can see already this is the inside of the project, but the ribbing effect has already been done. And then this is what this side is going to look like on the right side of the project. So now let me show you how to do it at the end of your project. All right, so to do the ribbing at the end of a project, I'm actually going to use a lifeline. And a lifeline is a single piece of yarn or cording that you pick up the loops on your work. That way, when you unravel it, it doesn't continue to unravel. You can also use stitch markers if you want to individually go through each of the identified pins that you want to use for your pattern, but you can also use a lifeline, which I find super simple. So for this project, these leg warmers that I'm making, I just knit 65 rows. And then we're going to repeat the same pattern we did when we cast on. So what I'm going to end up doing is behind each pin, starting with the first pin, I'm going to pick up the loop with my curved darning needle. And then I'm just going to, if you can see here, I just picked up the loop and I'm just going to be lightly threading this through. This is my lifeline. So then we're just going to continue around with every other pin. And all I'm doing is picking up the loop immediately behind the pin. And this will do a couple things. Number one, it'll help you identify very easily which of the stitches you need to release to create the ribbing. Also, it'll prevent any sort of accidental slippage if you forget to catch the loop in time. Now that we've added our lifeline, and again, it's just loosely behind those knots. We don't want to create any tension or any puckering or anything. It's really just to identify and hold those loops in place. So now we're going to continue to knit the amount of rows we want for the ribbing. For the beginning of the project, we actually ended up doing 10. For the end of the project, I actually want to do just 5. So I'm going to knit an additional 5 rows. So now we're going to do the same process we did at the very beginning of our project, starting with the white pin. Now here, this is where that loop has been identified, but we're going to start by releasing that stitch and again, releasing it from all of the stitches underneath. All right, now what I want to point out to you, because this can create a gap if you miss it. So the loop that we've picked up is right here. It's in the lifeline. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to continue to unravel. But if we just were to pick up this loop right here and do the ribbing, what's going to happen is we're going to have just this loose post right here. So this post right here that keeps wanting to go to the right, you do want to make sure that is to the left. And then when you pick up this loop here with your crochet hook, you can do the same process we did. So we're going to take that post and we're going to pull it through the loop. Then we're going to do the next one, pull it through, pick up the next one, pull it through, and again, all the way down until we get back to our pin. Once you've done that, you can actually just remove, by slipping that out, your lifeline, because we no longer need it for this stitch right here. And then we're going to continue through. So that was our first one. Second, we're going to make sure that that's popped down. And now we're ready to do this one right here. Once again, we're going to create this ribbing effect all the way around until we get back to our first pin. And when you get to the end of your project, you can cast off with waste yarn as you typically would. You could go around an additional row. It's really up to you and your personal preference. Once you take your work off of the machine and you give it a little stretch, you'll see that your ribbing starts to look really beautiful. And then all you have to do, just like you would do on a standard project, is you would come back around and pick up the live loops, whether that is going to be single crochet, slip stitch, darning needle, whichever method you are going to use. So that is how to add ribbing to your circular knitting machine projects.